What if most of what you believe about yourself isn't actually yours? What if it was handed to you before you were even old enough to say no? A surgeon asked himself a version of that question after he should have died and didn't. His name was Don Miguel Ruiz. Welcome to Ascend and Awaken, Timeless Wisdom for Awakening and Inner Peace. Don Miguel Ruiz was born in rural Mexico in 1952, the youngest of 13 children into a family of healers. His mother was a folk healer who blended physical, spiritual, and psychological healing methods. His grandfather was a shaman, a man of knowledge. But the young Ruiz didn't want any of that. He wanted modern life, modern proof, modern certainty. So he went to medical school. He became a surgeon, practicing neurosurgery alongside his brother in Tijuana, cutting into the brain to heal what could be measured, mapped, and explained. And then, late one night, sometime in the early 1970s, driving home after a long shift, he fell asleep at the wheel. The car slammed into a concrete wall. He should have died. He didn't. He described what happened in that crash as a kind of rupture, not just to his body, but to the entire architecture of the life he thought he was supposed to live. The certainty he built his identity on, the medical degree, the scientific worldview, the rejection of his family's superstitions, cracked open in an instant, and on an ordinary road, on an ordinary night. He recovered, but something in him had shifted, quietly, irreversibly. He didn't walk away from medicine the next morning. He kept practicing, kept showing up as a surgeon, kept doing the work he trained his whole life to do. But the question that crash had opened in him never fully closed. It sat there, underneath everything, for years. And in 1986, more than a decade after that night, Ruiz finally made the decision. He left medicine for good. Not in a single dramatic moment, in a slow, decade-long unfolding, the kind most real transformation actually is. He went back to his mother, back to the lineage he had spent his entire young adulthood trying to outrun, and apprenticed himself, fully now, to the very Toltec wisdom he had once dismissed as something his family believed in, but he had outgrown. Ruiz opens his teaching with an old story, the parable of a man who calls himself the Smoky Mirror. The teaching underneath the story is this: everything in existence reflects the way a mirror reflects. You reflect, I reflect. Every person we encounter is, in some sense, a mirror showing us back to ourselves. But most mirrors aren't clean. They're smoky. Not literal smoke. A fog of belief, fear, and inherited rule absorbed so early in life, so wordlessly, that we were never thought to question whether any of it was actually ours. Ruiz calls the process that creates the fog domestication, borrowing deliberately the same word we use for animals, the way we train a dog to sit, to come, to stay. Reward for compliance, punishment for resistance is, he argues, almost exactly how a human child is shaped into an acceptable adult. First, parents domesticate the child, then schools, then religion, then culture itself. And here's the part of the teaching that lands hardest. Eventually, we don't need anyone else to enforce the rules anymore. We become our own domesticator. We police our own thoughts. We punish our own failures before anyone else gets the chance. The voice in your head that judges you harshest, Ruiz would say that voice was never originally yours. It was installed. And what was installed can, with real effort, be uninstalled. If you spent any time with the Christian mystics, Meister Eckhart, the Desert Fathers, you'll recognize this idea wearing different clothes. They call it the false self. Ruiz calls it the domesticated self. Different centuries, different vocabulary, pointing at the same fog. Here is where Ruiz's teaching becomes something more than diagnosis. It becomes a path forward. He says most of what we believe about who we are, what we deserve, and what the world is like was never actually chosen by us. It was agreed to, absorbed so young, so completely, that by the time we're old enough to examine it, it no longer feels like a belief at all. It feels like simply how things are. But if those agreements were absorbed without our consent, then new agreements can be chosen instead, deliberately, consciously, on purpose. That is the entire architecture of his teaching. 4 new agreements. Simple enough to say in a single sentence, difficult enough to live that they can occupy a lifetime, and genuinely powerful enough to reshape how a person experiences reality. Ruiz says, speak with integrity. Say only what you mean. Avoid using the word to speak against yourself or to gossip about others. Use the power of your word in the direction of truth and love. Ruiz treats the spoken word as something closer to a spell than a sound. In the Toltec tradition he draws from, the word isn't just how we describe reality. It's one of the primary tools we use to create it. Think about how many of the wounds you still carry arrived through words. A parent's offhand comment that became a lifelong belief about your worth. A single sentence from a teacher, a partner, a boss, repeated to yourself so many times it calcified into identity. Impeccability doesn't mean never making a mistake. The word comes from the Latin for without sin, but Ruiz redefines sin simply as something that works against yourself. Gossip is a sin against the speaker as much as the subject. Self-criticism is a sin against the self. Most of the wounds we carry came from careless words. Most of the healing available to us will come from chosen words, chosen differently, this time on purpose. Ruiz says, nothing others do is because of you. What others say and do is a projection of their own reality, their own dream. When you are immune to the opinions and actions of others, you won't be the victim of needless suffering. This is the agreement people misunderstand fastest. It does not mean stop caring. It does not mean become numb to feedback, to love, to consequence. It means recognizing that almost everyone you will ever interact with is responding to their own internal weather, their own fears, their own domestication, their own unhealed history, far more than they are responding to the actual truth of who you are. When someone lashes out, criticizes, or withholds approval, Ruiz would ask you to notice that reaction was shaped by their entire life before they ever met you. You are very rarely the actual cause. You are simply the nearest surface for something that was already there. This is not indifference. It is freedom. Not because the world becomes kinder, but because you stop handing it to the authority to define you. Ruiz says, find the courage to ask questions and to express what you really want. Communicate with others as clearly as you can to avoid misunderstandings, sadness, and drama. Ruiz observes something almost embarrassingly simple once you see it. Human beings would rather quietly invent an explanation than ask one honest question. We assume we know why someone went quiet. We assume we know what a silence means, what a delayed reply means, what a certain tone of voice was really saying. And then, this is the dangerous part, we stop treating it as an assumption. We start treating it as a fact. Marriages erode this way. Friendships end this way. Entire family rifts can trace back to an assumption nobody ever had the courage to simply ask about out loud. One honest question can dissolve in 5 minutes what years of silent assumption took a decade to build. Ruiz says, your best is going to change from moment to moment. It will be different when you are healthy as opposed to sick. Under any circumstance, simply do your best, and you will avoid self-judgment, self-abuse, and regret. This fourth agreement is the one that holds the other three together, and the one most often turned into a weapon against ourselves. Your best is not a fixed standard you either clear or fail. Ruiz is explicit. Your best on 4 hours of sleep in grief under pressure is simply different from your best on a clear, rested, supported day. The agreement was never to be extraordinary every day. It was to stop pretending that an exhausted, grieving, depleted version of your effort is somehow a moral failure. Some days your best is extraordinary. Some days your best is simply getting through with your heart still intact. Ruiz says both have always been enough. Ruiz himself didn't stop at 4. Years later, he returned with his son, Don Jose Ruiz, now a teacher in his own right, carrying the family Toltec's lineage forward to add a fifth agreement. Be skeptical, but learn to listen. It's a fitting place for Ruiz to eventually land, questioning even his own teaching, rather than asking you to simply accept it as final truth. That's a conversation for another day. Today, these 4 are more than enough to work with. Ruiz wasn't writing from a monastery, a cave, or a mountaintop retreat. He was an ordinary surgeon on an ordinary night doing an ordinary thing, driving home, when something in him cracked open against a concrete wall. It would take him more than a decade to fully follow where that crack led. What he discovered afterward wasn't a new philosophy invented from nothing. It was ancient Toltec wisdom carried by his own family for generations that he had spent years running from before he was finally ready to receive it. His teaching, underneath all of it, is not about becoming someone new. It is about carefully, deliberately unlearning who you never actually meant to be in the first place. One of these four agreements still humbles me more than the rest. Agreements 1, 2, and 4, be impeccable with your word, don't take it personally, always do your best, I've generally gotten better at, especially as I've aged and moved through different life experiences. But agreement 3, don't make assumptions, that one I still wrestle with moment to moment. And what I've noticed is judgment shows up right alongside it. The two travel together. What's helped me loosen that grip over the past 25 plus years has been a spiritual practice I came across that slowly taught me to slow down, to be more present, to create just a little space before I react to what life puts in front of me. Not perfectly, not every day, but a bit better day by day. And I know this will keep being a challenge. On the days I'm not centered, the assuming and the judging are right there, ready to pounce. So I take it moment by moment, day by day. And on the days I fall down, because I still do, I acknowledge it, I own it, I forgive it, and I move on with my day, knowing that staying vigilant is the only way I keep reducing those slip-ups. Today's invitation is this. Choose just one of the four agreements, just one. And for the next 24 hours, before you speak, before you react, before you assume, pause and ask yourself one honest question. Is this impeccable? Is this actually mine to take personally? Am I assuming or do I actually know? You don't have to master all four today. You only have to choose one moment and meet it differently than you would have met it yesterday. That is enough. That has always been enough. Thank you for spending this time with me here on Ascend and Awaken. Share in the comments. Which of the four agreements do you find hardest to live by? I read every comment and I genuinely love to know. If Ascend and Awaken supports your journey, consider subscribing for more reflections on timeless wisdom, spiritual awakening, and inner peace. Until next time, peace, love, and light to you on your spiritual journey.